The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and despair. The machines beeped a countdown to my end, each tone marking another moment lost. I was 26 years old and dying. Not how I'd planned to spend my Thursday. "Olivia, darling, can I get you anything?" Aunt Victoria's voice dripped with concern, but her eyes kept darting to the designer watch on her wrist. The same watch I'd gifted her last Christmas when I was too weak to question the credit card statement. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. The rare heart condition that had ambushed my body 6 months ago had progressed faster than anyone expected. Except maybe Victoria. "No need to strain yourself, sweetie. I'm right here." She patted my hand, her new diamond tennis bracelet catching the fluorescent light. Another gift I didn't remember giving. As she leaned over to adjust my pillow, a performance for the nurse who had just entered, memories flooded back with startling clarity. The documents she'd brought to me 3 weeks ago when I was heavily medicated. The pen she'd placed in my trembling hand, her manicured finger pointing at signature lines while murmuring reassurances about just routine estate matters and making sure everything's taken care of. Victoria had been my guardian since I was 8 after my parents' car plunged off a mountain road during a rainstorm. Their death left me with nothing but nightmares and a trust fund that would have made most lottery winners jealous. A trust fund that Victoria could never directly access, until now, apparently. The nurse checked my vitals, her expression telling me what I already knew. Not long now. "The doctor will be in shortly," she said softly before leaving. Victoria's phone chimed. She glanced at it, poorly hiding her annoyance at the interruption to whatever she was planning next. Probably deciding which vacation house to buy with my money. "I have to take this, sweetie. Business call. I'll be right outside." As she walked away, her designer heels clicking on the linoleum floor, a fog lifted from my mind. For the first time in years, I saw Victoria clearly. Not as the caring aunt who'd raised me, but as the predator she really was. Every loan she'd needed for emergencies. Every investment opportunity that was too good to pass up. Every time she'd dismissed my questions about dwindling funds as my poor head for numbers. I wasn't her niece, I was her ATM. And now, as I lay dying, she was finally making her final withdrawal. The realization came too late. My vision blurred. The beeping accelerated, then became a single, sustained tone. The last thing I saw was Victoria rushing back in, phone still in hand, crocodile tears already forming as doctors pushed past her. The darkness that followed was absolute. No white light. No deceased relatives welcoming me. Just a void, vast and endless, where I floated without form or substance. Then a voice. Not a sound exactly, more like thoughts being inserted directly into whatever remained of my consciousness. "Olivia Chen, your ledger is unbalanced." "My what?" I tried to speak, surprised to find I could. "The scales of your existence. Fate has miscalculated. You were not meant to leave with such injustice unaddressed." "You mean Victoria? What she did to me?" "Among other things. Your path was altered unnaturally. A correction is possible, but rare. You may return to a critical juncture." "Return? You mean live again? With your memories intact, a chance to rewrite what was written incorrectly. When would I go back to the first moment of your adult independence? When choices truly became your own. My 18th birthday, the day I first gained access to my trust fund. And Victoria won't know that I remember everything? No one will know but you. What's the catch? Even in death, I'd learned to look for the fine print. There is no catch, Olivia Chen. Only a chance to balance what was unbalanced. Do you accept?" Without a second's hesitation. Yes. The darkness compressed, squeezing me from all sides. Pain beyond description flooded whatever was left of me. Then, I gasped awake, my heart pounding. Sunlight streamed through familiar curtains, the pale blue ones with tiny silver stars that I'd had since I was 10. I bolted upright in my childhood bed, patting myself down, solid, real. My phone lay on the nightstand and I grabbed it with shaking hands. June 15th, 2015. 7:30 a.m., my 18th birthday, 8 years before my death. A knock at the door jolted me from my shock. "Olivia, birthday girl, I've made your favorite breakfast. Blueberry pancakes with whipped cream?" Victoria's voice, younger, less raspy than in my final moments, but unmistakably hers, sent a chill down my spine. I fought the urge to scream or throw something at the door. Instead, I took a deep breath. "Just a minute," I called, surprised by how young my voice sounded. I scrambled to the mirror. My reflection shocked me. Healthy skin with a hint of a summer tan, clear eyes, thick hair. No dark circles, no sickly pallor, no hollowed cheeks from medications that made eating impossible, and I was 18 again. And today was the day Victoria would begin systematically draining my inheritance. Except this time, I knew exactly what she was planning. This time, I would be ready. "Coming!" I called, schooling my features into the innocent expression of a girl who had no idea her aunt was about to rob her blind. "Game on, Victoria." Victoria's smile was dazzling as she set the breakfast tray across my lap. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. Everything about her screamed effortless elegance, an image she cultivated meticulously, especially on important days. Like the day her meal ticket turned 18. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She leaned down to kiss my cheek, her expensive perfume enveloping me. I can't believe my little girl is all grown up. I wasn't her little girl. I had never been her little girl. But I smiled and cut into the pancakes, knowing I needed to play my part perfectly. "Thanks, Aunt Vicky. These look amazing." "Well, it's a big day. The meeting with Mr. Winters at 10, then lunch at Castelli's, and I thought we could do some shopping afterward. Maybe get you something special." "With my money, of course." "The meeting with Mr. Winters?" I asked, pretending ignorance. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Just boring legal stuff about your parents' trust. Nothing to worry about. I'll help you understand all the complicated bits." "I'm sure you will," I thought, but said, "That's right. I forgot that was today." 18 is such an exciting age." She perched on the edge of my bed. "You'll have so many decisions to make about college and your future. It's a good thing you have me to guide you." In my first life, I'd nodded gratefully, completely dependent on her guidance. I'd signed whatever she put in front of me that day, trusting her implicitly. This time, I simply took another bite of pancake and said, "I've been doing some thinking about college, actually." A flicker of concern crossed her face before her smile reasserted itself. "Oh, I thought we decided on Westmore University. Their business program is excellent, and it's where your father would have wanted you to go." My father had never mentioned Westmore University in his life, but Victoria knew that invoking my parents was her most effective tool. Previously, I'd crumbled at the slightest suggestion that I might disappoint their memory. "I've been researching other options," I said carefully. "Maybe something more economical." Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Economical?" "Sweetie, with your trust fund, you don't need to worry about that. I just think it would be responsible to consider costs. Dad was always careful with money, right?" She recovered quickly. "That's because he had to build his company from scratch. You're in a different position thanks to his hard work. He'd want you to have the best." The meeting with Mr. Winters was exactly as I remembered it. His office smelled of leather and old books, a deliberate aesthetic choice that communicated stability and tradition to his wealthy clients. At 62, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Jefferson Winters looked every inch the part of the family attorney. "Miss Chen, happy birthday," he said, standing to greet me. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "And Mrs. Chen, good to see you as well." Victoria had never formally adopted me, but she'd been introducing herself as Mrs. Chen since becoming my guardian. It was a small deception that bothered me more in this second life than it had in my first. "Please, sit." Mr. Winters gestured to the leather chairs facing his desk. "Today is an important milestone, Olivia. As you know, your parents established a trust fund that becomes partially accessible to you at age 18. I nodded, feigning polite interest while my heart raced. This meeting had been a blur the first time. Victoria had done most of the talking while I sat in confused silence. "The structure is as follows," Mr. Winters continued, sliding a document toward me. "Today, you gain access to 25% of the principal. At age 21, another 25%. And at 25, you receive full control of the remaining assets." "And how much is in the trust currently?" I asked, a question I'd been too intimidated to pose in my previous life. Mr. Winters looked slightly surprised at my directness, while Victoria shifted in her chair. The total value as of last month's statement is just over $12 million, he replied. Victoria's quick intake of breath was barely audible. In my first life, she'd managed to keep the exact figure from me, telling me only that it was enough to be comfortable, but requiring careful management. So today I can access about $3 million? I asked, doing the math deliberately to show I was paying attention. That's correct. The remaining $9 million stays in the trust, continuing to generate returns until the next distribution dates. Victoria leaned forward. Mr. Winters, given Olivia's youth and inexperience with financial matters, wouldn't it be prudent to establish a more supervised arrangement for these funds? Here it came, the first move in her game. Mr. Winters adjusted his glasses. The trust specifically gives Olivia full discretion over each distribution when released. Your role as guardian pertains to her personal welfare until age 18, not financial control beyond what's allocated for living expenses from the trust's income. Of course, Victoria smiled tightly. I'm just concerned about her being overwhelmed. Perhaps I could co-sign on accounts, just as a safeguard? That would be her decision. Mr. Winters turned to me. Olivia, I've prepared the necessary paperwork for the transfer. You'll need to decide where you want these funds directed. In my previous life, Victoria had suggested a joint account for simplicity. Within a year, most of that money had disappeared into family investments. I'd like to establish my own accounts, I said firmly, and I'd like to discuss some investment options as well. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into the leather armrest. Sweetie, we can talk about investments later. Maybe start with just a portion in a joint account for college expenses. Actually, I smiled at Mr. Winters, is it possible to leave most of the distribution in the trust's investment portfolio for now? I'd only like to withdraw a smaller amount for immediate needs. Mr. Winters couldn't fully hide his surprise or his approval. Absolutely, that's quite a prudent approach, Olivia. I've been reading about compound interest, I said, enjoying the momentary flash of alarm in Victoria's eyes. It seems smart to let most of it keep growing. Your father would be proud of that decision, Mr. Winters said quietly. Victoria's smile was brittle. Well, looks like someone's been doing her homework. Still, let's make sure you have enough for college and living expenses. I'll need some time to think about college, I countered. I might take a gap year, or consider community college first. Victoria's mask slipped for just a second, naked panic flashing across her face before she recovered. We can discuss all the options at lunch, sweetie. Of course, I agreed pleasantly, turning back to Mr. Winters. For now, I'd like to set up an account with just $200,000. The rest can stay where it is. The drive home from Mr. Winters' office was tense. Victoria white-knuckled the steering wheel of her Lexus, her smile long gone. Community college? She finally burst out. A gap year? Olivia, what's gotten into you? We've talked about Westmore for years. We hadn't, actually. Victoria had mentioned it for the first time just 3 months ago, after learning that my trust fund would pay tuition directly to whatever university I attended. I'm just exploring options, I said mildly. Mr. Winters seemed to think it was a good idea to be cautious with the money. Mr. Winters isn't family, she snapped, then visibly reined herself in. Sweetie, I'm just looking out for your future. Your parents would want you to have the best education, not some community college. Did they say that? I asked innocently. In their will or something? Victoria's jaw tightened. They didn't have to. I knew your parents better than anyone. Better than me was the implication. It had worked before, making me feel like an inadequate daughter for not somehow intuitively knowing what my parents would have wanted. I was thinking, I said, changing tactics. Now that I have access to some funds, I should contribute to household expenses. Victoria's expression brightened immediately. That's very mature of you, Olivia. I wasn't going to bring it up, but yes, there are quite a few expenses I've been covering alone all these years. I figured, so I thought maybe $5,000 a month would be fair for rent, food, utilities. It was a generous amount, far more than my actual living expenses in her home. But it was also far less than she had extracted from me in my previous life. Victoria's smile faltered. Well, that's a start. But there's also property taxes, insurance, maintenance costs, not to mention all the extras like your cell phone, clothing, entertainment. So what number were you thinking? I asked directly. Caught off guard by my bluntness, she hesitated. Well, 15,000 monthly would be more reasonable, considering everything. In my first life, I'd been giving her over 30,000 a month by the end of that first year, convinced it was barely covering our expenses. Let's compromise at 8,000, I said, and I'll review it if needed. Victoria nodded stiffly, clearly disappointed but unwilling to push harder on day one. All right, for now. As we pulled into the driveway of the sprawling Tudor-style home my parents had purchased before their death, I spotted my cousin Rachel lounging on the front steps. At 20, she was Victoria's only child from a brief marriage that ended before I came to live with them. In designer jeans and a silk top that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, she epitomized the spoiled, entitled lifestyle Victoria had cultivated. Finally! Rachel called as we got out of the car. I thought you guys would never get back. How's it feel to be a millionaire, Liv? The casual way she announced my financial status to the entire neighborhood made me cringe. In my first life, I'd naively confided in Rachel about the trust fund details. She'd promptly told her entire social circle, resulting in a sudden influx of friends I'd never met before. I'm not a millionaire, Rach, I lied smoothly. The trust just covers college and basic expenses until I'm older. Rachel's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose in disbelief. Seriously? I thought Uncle Robert left you like crazy money? Rachel, Victoria interrupted sharply. That's not appropriate conversation for the front yard. Or at all, I thought. But Victoria's concern wasn't privacy. It was controlling the narrative about my finances. Whatever, Rachel shrugged. Happy birthday, by the way. Mom, can I borrow your credit card? I'm going shopping with Mackenzie and Taylor. Victoria hesitated, her eyes sliding toward me. We'll talk inside, dear. I knew what that meant. The credit card Rachel would use was linked to an account I would be funding. In my previous life, I'd paid for Rachel's shopping sprees, her spring break trips, even the down payment on her first car, all filtered through Victoria, who presented these expenses as family obligations. Not this time. As I followed them inside, I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I began typing. Day 1 of Second Chance, 1. Set up separate account, done 2. Limit Victoria to $8K/month, done 3. Research local tech startups, priority 4. Contact Emma. Emma had been my best friend in middle school before Victoria gradually engineered our separation, claiming Emma was a bad influence from the wrong sort of family. In reality, Emma's mother was a successful real estate agent who had once questioned Victoria about some suspicious financial activity. Activity I now understood had involved my inheritance. In my first life, I'd lost touch with Emma completely. In this one, I intended to reconnect immediately. The universe had given me a second chance. I wasn't going to waste a single day of it. Olivia, Emma's voice was cautious on the phone. Is this really you? It's me, I said, my throat tight with emotion. After 10 years in my previous life without her friendship, hearing her voice felt like coming home. I know it's been a while. 3 years is a bit more than a while, she replied, but I could hear the smile in her voice. What's up? Is everything okay? Actually, I was hoping we could meet up. I miss you. A pause. Wow, yeah, that would be cool. Does your aunt know you're calling me? In my first life, I'd accepted Victoria's claims that Emma had spread rumors about me, that she'd only been friends with me for my money, that she'd laughed about me behind my back. All lies designed to isolate me from someone who might see through Victoria's manipulation. I'm 18 now, I said. Victoria doesn't control who I talk to anymore. Another pause. Okay then. Coffee at Millie's tomorrow at 4? Perfect. Millie's cafe hadn't changed a bit. The same mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and the rich smell of freshly ground coffee beans. I arrived 15 minutes early, jittery with anticipation. The Emma I remembered had been a gangly 14-year-old with braces and wild curly hair. I had no idea what she looked like now. Olivia? I turned to see a tall young woman with the same curly hair, now styled in a shoulder-length bob. No braces, but the same warm smile. Emma! I stood up so quickly I nearly knocked over my chair. She laughed, and suddenly we were hugging like no time had passed. When we separated, she studied my face carefully. You look different, she said. Not physically, just, I don't know, more grown up than the last time I saw you. If she only knew. Life with Victoria will do that to you, I replied dryly. We ordered coffee, and for the first hour, we just caught up on surface level things. Her parents' divorce, my plans for college, mutual acquaintances from middle school. It was surreal having a conversation I'd missed entirely in my previous life. Finally, Emma set down her cup. So, are you going to tell me why you really called? Not that I'm not thrilled, but after 3 years of silence. I took a deep breath. I need advice about real estate. Her eyebrows shot up. Real estate? Why would you— Oh, wait, is this about your trust fund? You turned 18, right? I nodded, impressed she remembered the detail. Your mom's still in real estate, right? I'm interested in learning about investing in property. Emma laughed. Wow, not what I was expecting. Yeah, mom's still selling houses. She's a broker now, has her own agency. Would she talk to me? Just for advice? Sure, I guess. But why the sudden interest? I figured your aunt had all that stuff handled for you. I hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. I'm starting to realize I need to take control of my own finances. Victoria may not have my best interests at heart. Emma's expression turned serious. I've been saying that since we were 13, Liv. I know, I should have listened. The regret in my voice was genuine. Hey. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Better late than never, right? I'll call Mom tonight. By the time I got home, Victoria was waiting in the living room, her expression tense. Where have you been? She demanded. I was worried sick. You didn't answer my texts. I pulled out my phone. 3 missed texts, all within the last 20 minutes, escalating from casual inquiry to panic. Classic Victoria, creating a crisis out of nothing to make me feel guilty. Sorry, I was having coffee with Emma Parker. We lost track of time. Victoria's face darkened. Emma Parker? After what that girl did? What exactly did she do, Aunt Victoria? I asked calmly. Because I've been thinking about it and I can't actually remember what the big fight was about. She floundered momentarily. She was spreading rumors about you, terrible things. What things specifically? I don't want to upset you by repeating them. I'm not upset. I'm just curious why I let a good friendship die without even understanding why. Victoria stood up abruptly. I don't have to explain myself to you, Olivia. I protected you from someone who was using you. End of story. I'm an adult now, I replied evenly. I can choose my own friends. Being 18 doesn't make you immune to manipulation, she snapped, then caught herself. I'm sorry, sweetie. I just worry about you. People see dollar signs when they look at you. The irony was almost painful. Speaking of money, I said, changing the subject, I'm going to make a bank transfer to you tomorrow for this month's expenses. $8,000 as we agreed. Victoria's mood shifted instantly. Thank you, darling. That will be a big help. I'm also thinking of taking some business classes at Riverside Community College this fall, I added casually. They have an excellent entrepreneurship program. Her smile froze. Riverside, that's not what we discussed. It's just something I'm considering. Their classes are a fraction of Westmore's cost, and I could live at home and save even more. But your education is an investment, Victoria insisted. Westmore's connections alone are worth the tuition. I'll keep that in mind, I said noncommittally. I'm going to head upstairs and rest. It's been a big day. In my room, I locked the door and pulled out the notebook I'd hidden in my desk drawer. Inside were notes I'd made about my previous life, investments that had boomed, companies that had failed, world events I could prepare for. Some details were fuzzy, but I remembered enough to give myself a massive advantage. I opened my laptop and began researching tech startups in our area. One name immediately jumped out: NeuroSync. In my previous life, this small AI company had been acquired by Google for billions in 2019. Their early investors had made fortunes. I'd need to move fast. With careful planning, I could turn my initial 3 million into much more before Victoria realized what was happening. A soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Olivia, it was Rachel. Can I talk to you for a sec? I closed my laptop and unlocked the door. Rachel slipped in, already changed into designer loungewear, her makeup still flawless despite the late hour. So Mom says you're being weird about your trust fund, she said without preamble, perching on the edge of my bed. Weird how? I asked cautiously. Like not wanting to spend it? Talking about community college? She wrinkled her nose as if I'd suggested eating roadkill. What's that about? I'm just being careful with my parents' money. Rachel rolled her eyes. It's your money now, dummy. Why not enjoy it? In my first life, Rachel had been a constant presence, encouraging me to spend lavishly, to live a little. I now understood she'd been Victoria's unwitting accomplice, helping to normalize excessive spending while Victoria siphoned funds for herself. I'll enjoy it, I assured her, just in my own way. Like hanging out with Emma Parker? She smirked. Mom is losing it over that one. Emma's nice. You might like her if you gave her a chance. Rachel snorted. Please. Her mom sells houses in the poor part of town. They're not our kind of people. What exactly is our kind? You know, she gestured vaguely. People who understand the lifestyle, who don't judge. Judge what? Rachel sighed dramatically. Whatever. Mom wanted me to talk to you about the Westmore thing. She's really got her heart set on you going there. Because it's prestigious, or because the trust pays tuition directly to the school? A flicker of confusion crossed Rachel's face. What does that matter? Nothing, I said, just thinking out loud. Anyway, Rachel stood up. Don't be so boring with your money, Liv. Life's short. As the door closed behind her, I whispered, you have no idea how short it can be. The next morning, I met with a financial advisor Mr. Winters had recommended. Someone with no connection to Victoria. By the end of the week, I'd opened new accounts, made my first investment in NeuroSync, and enrolled in summer business classes at Riverside Community College. Victoria's displeasure manifested in small ways. Cold shoulders, passive-aggressive comments, forgetting to call me for dinner. But the monthly payments kept her from outright confrontation. Emma's mother, Diana Parker, turned out to be an invaluable resource. Over lunch at her office, she explained the fundamentals of real estate investment. The key is location, timing, and seeing potential others miss, she said, spreading out property listings on her desk. Start small, maybe a condo in an up-and-coming area. Rent it out, build equity, then leverage that for your next purchase. What about commercial properties? I asked. Diana's eyebrows rose. That's a more complicated game, but potentially more profitable. Are you thinking that big already? I'm just exploring all options, I said innocently. Well, there's a small strip mall on the east side that's undervalued because of some minor structural issues. Fix those, get better tenants, and you could double your investment in 5 years. In my previous life, that exact strip mall had been razed for luxury condominiums. The developer had made millions. That sounds interesting, I said. Could we take a look at it? By the end of the summer, I had purchased the strip mall through an LLC created with Mr. Winters' help, invested in 3 promising startups I remembered succeeding, and moved into a modest apartment near the community college. Victoria had fought the move viciously. I don't understand why you need your own place when you have a perfectly good home here, she'd cried, actual tears streaming down her face. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By abandoning me? In my first life, I'd capitulated immediately, staying in her house until I was 23, giving her unfettered access to my finances and my life. This time, I stood firm. I'm not abandoning you, Aunt Victoria. I'll still come for dinner twice a week, and the money I'm sending you every month won't change. It's not about the money, she insisted, though we both knew it absolutely was. I know, I said soothingly, but I need to learn independence. Mom and Dad would want that for me. The mention of my parents, usually Victoria's trump card, made her flinch when I deployed it against her. My apartment was nothing special, a 1-bedroom in a secure building with good management, but it was mine, free of Victoria's manipulation. The first night there, I slept better than I had in years, in either lifetime. And on my nightstand sat a framed photo of my parents, the one Victoria had always kept safely stored in the attic. I'd found it buried in a box, exactly where I remembered it being. "I'm fixing it," I whispered to their smiling faces. "Everything she took, everything she broke. I'm fixing it all." 3 years can pass in the blink of an eye when you're rebuilding a life. I turned 21 on a warm summer day, sitting across from Mr. Winters in the same leather chair as before. "The second distribution is ready for transfer," he said, smiling over his glasses at me. "Another 3 million, as per the trust's terms." "I must say, Olivia, I've been impressed with your financial acumen these past 3 years." "Thank you," I said, my confidence no longer the facade it had been at 18. "I've had good advisors." Mr. Winters nodded. "Your investment portfolio has shown remarkable growth. The trust's principal has increased by nearly 15% despite the distributions. In reality, my personal investments had performed even better. NeuroSync had been acquired exactly when I remembered, turning my initial investment into a fortune. The strip mall was now fully leased with quality tenants paying premium rates. And through Emma's mother, I'd quietly begun acquiring properties in Victoria's neighborhood, including the vacant lot behind her house and the foreclosed home 2 doors down. All through holding companies Victoria knew nothing about. "I'd like to keep the same arrangement," I told Mr. Winters. "Transfer just a portion to my personal accounts and leave the rest in the trust's investments." "A very prudent choice," he agreed. "Your father had the same conservative approach to wealth. He always said, 'Money doesn't grow on trees, but it does grow from trees.'" I finished, remembering one of my father's favorite sayings about paper money and patience. Mr. Winters looked startled, then pleased. "Yes, exactly. He would be very proud of you, Olivia." Victoria wasn't proud. She was frustrated. "I don't understand why you live in that tiny apartment when you could afford a proper house," she complained over our bi-weekly dinner at her home. "You're a millionaire, for God's sake." Over the years, Victoria's house had undergone a dramatic transformation. New furniture, renovated kitchen, expanded master suite, all funded by the support payments I continued to provide. She'd increased her social activities as well, joining the country club, hosting lavish parties, taking luxury vacations with her circle of similarly materialistic friends. All while I maintained my modest lifestyle and watched my wealth multiply. "I like my apartment," I replied mildly, taking a sip of the expensive wine she'd opened for the occasion. "And I'm saving for the future." "The future isn't guaranteed, Olivia," Victoria said, a statement that hit closer to home than she could possibly know. "You need to live in the present." Rachel nodded in agreement from across the table. "Seriously, Liv, you're so boring with your money. It's depressing." At 23, Rachel had graduated from the State University with a degree in communications and now worked as a social media consultant, which seemed to involve posting pictures of herself using various products. Her apartment, paid for by Victoria, with my money, cost 3 times what mine did. "How's the job going, Rachel?" I asked, changing the subject. She brightened. "Amazing! This skincare brand is flying me to Miami next month for a campaign. All expenses paid, plus $10,000 for the posts." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. Despite knowing she was Victoria's unwitting accomplice in my financial exploitation, I couldn't bring myself to resent Rachel. She was a product of her upbringing, just as I had been. "You know," Victoria interjected, swirling her wine, "with this second distribution, you really should consider upgrading your lifestyle a bit, Olivia. Perhaps a nice car to start? That old Honda of yours is hardly befitting someone of your status." My old Honda was a reliable, fuel-efficient car I'd purchased with cash. It served its purpose perfectly. "I'm comfortable with what I have," I said. Victoria sighed dramatically. "Well, I've been thinking of doing some more renovations here. The master bathroom is terribly outdated and the landscaping needs a complete overhaul." Here it came, the real reason for this dinner. "That sounds nice," I said noncommittally. "Of course, it's a significant investment. Probably around $200,000 for everything I want to do." In my previous life, I'd have immediately offered to cover it. This time, I simply nodded and took another bite of my dinner. After an awkward silence, Victoria continued. I was thinking, since you're getting your second distribution, perhaps you might consider increasing our monthly arrangement. The cost of living has gone up considerably these past 3 years. That was true enough, but what Victoria didn't say was that her standard of living had inflated far beyond any reasonable cost of living increase. I've been paying the same amount for 3 years, I acknowledged. I suppose an adjustment is fair. What did you have in mind? Victoria tried to look hesitant, as if she hadn't calculated this figure precisely. Perhaps 15,000 a month? That would help cover the renovations over time as well. In my first life, by this point, I had been giving her nearly 40,000 monthly, convinced it was my duty to support the aunt who had sacrificed so much to raise me. I can do 12, I countered. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. 13.5? 12.5. Victoria laughed, a brittle sound. Listen to us, haggling like market vendors. Fine, 12.5 it is. Rachel looked between us with sudden interest. Wait, Liv has been paying you? Victoria shot her daughter a warning glance. Olivia contributes to household expenses since this is still her home, even if she chooses not to live here. But I thought... Rachel's brow furrowed. I thought all those trips and renovations were from your design business? Victoria's interior design consultancy had exactly one client, herself. But she had maintained the fiction of a thriving business for years. My business is doing very well, Victoria said stiffly. Olivia's contribution just helps with the basics. Rachel didn't look convinced, but dropped the subject. Later, as I was leaving, Rachel walked me to my car. How much do you really give her each month? She asked bluntly. I considered lying, then decided against it. Currently 8,000, going up to 12.5. Rachel's eyes widened. Holy shit, that's more than I make in 6 months. It's for the house and everything, I said carefully. Your mom did raise me. Yeah, in the house my grandparents paid for, Rachel muttered. Then, seeing my surprised expression, what? You think I don't know this place was bought with your parents' money? Mom let that slip years ago when she was drunk. This was new information. In my previous life, I'd always believed the house was Victoria's. Does that bother you? I asked. Rachel shrugged. It is what it is. But maybe stop letting her guilt you into handing over your cash. She's doing fine. As I drove home, I pondered this unexpected ally. Rachel had never shown such insight in my previous life, or perhaps I'd never given her the opportunity. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Still on for dinner tomorrow? Michael Kane had entered my life 18 months ago when I purchased the office building where his architectural firm was headquartered. In my previous life, we'd never met. I died without experiencing the kind of relationship I now had with him. Absolutely, I texted back. Can't wait. Michael was everything Victoria would hate. Earnest, hardworking, completely unimpressed by wealth or status. His small firm specialized in sustainable urban development, and he lived in a modest loft he'd renovated himself. I'd kept him completely separate from Victoria's world, a private joy she couldn't taint. But that was about to change. Victoria had been asking increasingly pointed questions about my mystery man, and I knew she wouldn't stop until she'd vetted him for financial potential. The next evening, over Thai food at our favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurant, I broached the subject. My aunt wants to meet you, I said, watching his reaction carefully. Michael raised an eyebrow. The infamous Aunt Victoria? I was starting to think she was a myth. Trust me, she's all too real. I pushed my pad thai around with my fork. She's hosting a dinner party next weekend and specifically asked me to bring you. And that makes you nervous because Victoria has an agenda for everything, and I'm afraid that agenda includes interrogating you about your bank account and career prospects. Michael laughed. I think I can handle a nosy aunt. You don't understand. She's not just nosy, she's calculating. Everything is about status and money to her. He reached across the table to take my hand. Liv, it's just dinner. What's the worst that could happen? The dinner party was exactly the production I'd expected. Victoria had invited her most impressive friends, a surgeon, a retired judge, a gallery owner, and prepared an elaborate meal that would be featured on her Instagram page before dessert was served. Michael, dressed in a simple but well-fitted suit, handled the initial introductions with easy charm. I watched Victoria assess him, His watch, modest. His shoes, quality but not designer. His conversation, intelligent but lacking the name-dropping she valued. "So, Michael," she said during the main course, "Olivia tells me you're an architect. Do you have your own firm?" "A small one," he replied. "We focus on sustainable urban projects mainly." "How fascinating," Victoria said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "And is sustainable architecture profitable?" Michael smiled pleasantly. "We do all right. I believe in balancing profit with purpose." Victoria's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Admirable, though purpose doesn't pay for retirement." "Aunt Victoria," I interjected, "Michael's firm just won a major contract with the city for the Riverside redevelopment project." This was true and impressive enough that Victoria's expression shifted slightly. "Well, that sounds substantial," she allowed. "Olivia certainly deserves someone with ambition." "Olivia deserves someone who appreciates her for more than her trust fund," Michael replied evenly, holding Victoria's gaze. A hush fell over the table. Victoria's smile froze, then thawed into something more genuine and more calculating. "Indeed she does," she said smoothly. "Family looks out for family, after all." After dinner, as guests mingled in the living room, Victoria cornered me in the kitchen. "He's not what I expected," she said, refreshing her wine glass. "Quite charming, actually." "I'm glad you approve," I said cautiously. "I didn't say that." She sipped her wine. "He clearly doesn't come from money, and that firm of his sounds like a passion project, not a serious business." "He's very good at what he does," I defended, "and he makes me happy." Victoria patted my cheek condescendingly. "Happiness doesn't pay bills, darling. Just be careful with your heart and your checkbook." "What exactly are you implying?" "Simply that men have been known to pursue women for their money." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Has he asked you to invest in any of his projects?" "No," I said firmly, "and he won't." "We'll see," Victoria murmured. "They always ask eventually." Michael and I escaped as soon as it was polite to leave. In the car, he was quieter than usual. "I'm sorry about Victoria," I said finally. "She can be a piece of work," he finished, a slight edge to his voice. "Yeah, I got that. What did she say to you when I was helping clear the table?" Michael sighed. "She mentioned, very casually, that you've been supporting her financially. Then suggested I must find your generosity appealing." My hands clenched into fists. "She implied you're after my money." Pretty explicitly, actually. He glanced at me. "Is it true that you support her?" I hesitated, then nodded. "It's complicated. She raised me after my parents died, but what?" How could I explain the tangled web of guilt, obligation, and strategy without revealing the impossible truth of my rebirth? "She manipulates me," I said simply. "Always has. The money is part of a longer game." Michael was quiet for a moment. "What kind of game?" "One where I'm finally going to win." He didn't ask any more questions that night, but I knew Victoria had planted a seed of doubt, just as she'd intended. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Diana Parker, Emma's mother. "Olivia, I've got some interesting news," she said without preamble. "That property behind your aunt's house? The owner is finally willing to sell." I sat up straighter. "For how much?" "Above market, of course. He knows the location is premium." She named a figure that made me wince. "But considering your overall strategy, it might be worth it." Over the past 3 years, through various holding companies, I'd acquired 6 properties surrounding Victoria's home. The vacant lot behind her house was the final piece. "I'll take it," I said. "I thought you might," Diana replied, and I could hear the curiosity in her voice. She'd never asked why I was so interested in that specific neighborhood, and I'd never volunteered the information. "One more thing," I added. "Has Victoria contacted you about refinancing her mortgage?" Diana laughed. "How did you know?" "She called last week looking to tap her equity for some ridiculous renovation. The woman's house is already over-improved for the neighborhood." This was exactly as I'd expected. Victoria had been living beyond her means, counting on my payments and periodic loans to maintain her lifestyle. The renovations were her latest attempt to extract more money. "What did you tell her?" "That rates are favorable right now. I'll be sending an appraiser next week." "Perfect," I said. "Please keep me updated." When I hung up, I stared at the calendar on my wall. 3 years down, 2 to go before I received the final distribution from my trust. Victoria was already overextended financially, taking out equity from her home to fund her lifestyle, all according to plan. But as I flipped forward to the date of my final distribution, June 15th, 2023, a chill ran through me. In my previous life, I died just over 2 years after that date. The heart condition that killed me had been diagnosed 6 months before my death, which meant that in this timeline, my symptoms would begin around December 2022. I had no way of knowing if my rebirth had changed that medical destiny. Would my heart fail again? Or had the cosmic correction altered that fate as well? I couldn't count on more time. My plans for Victoria needed to accelerate. Victoria's new renovation was spectacular, a complete kitchen overhaul with custom cabinets, marble countertops, and appliances that cost more than some cars. She hosted a reveal party that was featured in a local lifestyle magazine, positioning herself as an interior design visionary. What the magazine didn't mention was that the renovation had been funded by a home equity loan that Victoria had no realistic way to repay. "Isn't it magnificent?" she gushed as I dutifully admired the kitchen during our bi-weekly dinner. The designer wanted to go with quartz, but I insisted on Calicut marble. One simply can't compromise on certain things. Rachel rolled her eyes behind her mother's back. Over the past year, a subtle shift had occurred in our relationship. As Rachel struggled to build her influencer business, she'd become increasingly critical of her mother's spending habits. "It's beautiful," I agreed. "How are the mortgage payments with the new loan?" "Nah." Victoria's smile flickered. "Manageable, though everything is getting so expensive these days." Translation: she needed more money from me. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that," Victoria continued, right on cue. "With my new design clients demanding so much of my time, I've had to cut back on paid projects. Just temporarily, of course." Her design clients were her friends who occasionally asked for advice they rarely took. The business was a fiction maintained to preserve her pride. "That sounds stressful," I said neutrally. "It is." She sighed dramatically, which is why I was thinking, perhaps we could revisit our financial arrangement, just until things stabilize. In my first life, I'd increased her monthly payments without question, believing her manufactured crises were genuine hardships. "I wish I could help," I said, injecting regret into my voice. "But I've committed to several major investments that have tied up my available funds." Victoria's smile vanished. "Investments? What investments?" "Some tech startups, primarily, and a real estate development project." "Real estate?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "With Diana Parker, I assume?" I nodded. "Emma's mother has been a wonderful mentor." "I see." Victoria's tone dropped 10 degrees. "Well, I wouldn't want to interfere with your business ventures." "They're really starting to pay off," I continued, watching her carefully. "The tech company I invested in early was just acquired. The return was substantial." "How substantial?" Rachel asked, leaning forward with interest. I named a figure that made Victoria's eyes widen. "That's remarkable," she said, recalculating her approach. "Perhaps instead of increasing our monthly arrangement, you might consider a one-time investment in my business?" "I've been thinking of expanding, maybe opening a small storefront." "I'd need to see a business plan," I replied. "Projected revenues, marketing strategy, that sort of thing." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Of course, I can put something together." She never would. Victoria had no business to expand, and we both knew it. But the suggestion accomplished what I wanted. It shifted her focus from demanding more monthly support to plotting a larger payday. After dinner, Rachel followed me outside again. "That tech investment," she said, lighting a cigarette. "Are you still getting in on deals like that?" "Sometimes. Why?" She exhaled a stream of smoke. "I need money, my own money, not Mom's." This was unexpected. "What for?" "I want to start an actual business, not this influencer crap that only pays when I pretend to love products I don't use." She looked away. "But Mom thinks it's a terrible idea, so she won't help." "What kind of business?" "A creative agency for small brands, helping them build authentic social media presence without the bullshit." She flicked ash onto the pristine driveway. "I have a business plan, unlike some people. I couldn't help but smile. I'd like to see it. Really? Rachel looked genuinely surprised. You'd actually consider investing? If the plan is solid, yes. She studied me for a moment. Why would you help me? We've never exactly been close. Because in my first life, I died believing you hated me, I thought. Because Victoria poisoned our relationship to keep us divided. Because maybe, just maybe, you can have a better life this time around, too. We're family, I said simply. A week later, Rachel emailed me a surprisingly thorough business plan. The concept was solid, her market analysis thoughtful, and the financial projections reasonable. She'd clearly put significant work into it, and I invited her to lunch at a quiet cafe far from Victoria's usual haunts. This is impressive. Bahuguf, I said after we'd ordered. You've really thought this through. Rachel tried to look nonchalant, but couldn't hide her pleasure at the compliment. Thanks, I've been working on it for almost a year. Why didn't you show it to your mom? Her expression darkened. I did at first. She said social media is just a fad, and I should focus on getting a real job at one of her friends' companies. But she's always bragging about your influencer work. Only because it makes her look good to have a daughter who gets free trips and designer clothes, Rachel said bitterly. She doesn't actually respect what I do. This aligned with the Victoria I knew. Appearance always trumped substance. How much startup capital do you need? I asked. Rachel named a modest sum, enough to rent a small office space and cover operating costs for 6 months. I can provide that, I said, as an investment, not a loan. 20% equity, with the option for you to buy back half of that after 2 years. Her eyes widened. Are you serious? I believe in your concept, and frankly, I think you have the connections and skills to make it work. I don't know what to say, Rachel stammered. Thank you. Just promise me one thing, I said. Don't tell Victoria where the money came from, at least not until you're up and running. Rachel's expression grew serious. Is everything okay between you two? You've been different the past few years, less, pliable. I almost laughed at her accurate assessment. Let's just say I've learned to set boundaries. Well, whatever happened, it's an improvement. She smiled, not her usual smirk, but something genuine. You're not nearly as boring as I used to think. That afternoon, I received a call from Diana Parker. The appraisal on Victoria's house came back, she said. She's not going to be happy. Oh? The value is lower than she expected. Significantly lower. This was surprising. The market's been strong. What happened? Several factors. The main issue is overdevelopment. She's put high-end finishes in a mid-range neighborhood. But there's also the matter of the surrounding properties. What about them? I asked innocently. They're being bought up by investment companies. There are rumors of rezoning for mixed-use development. Diana paused meaningfully. Companies that I believe you're connected to. I should have known Diana would figure it out eventually. I see. Olivia? Her voice softened. I've respected your privacy about this situation, but these purchases have systematically decreased the residential value of your aunt's home while increasing the commercial potential of the area, potential she can't access without selling. That's an interesting analysis, I said carefully. I'm not judging, Diana continued, but as someone who's arranged these purchases for you, I feel obligated to ask, what exactly are you planning? I considered how much to reveal. Diana had become a trusted advisor, but the full truth was too complex. Victoria has been financially exploiting me since my parents died, I said finally. I'm simply ensuring that when everything is settled, the balance is restored. Diana was quiet for a moment. I suspected as much. Emma always said there was something off about your aunt. The loan Victoria's applying for? I asked. Will she get it? With the lower appraisal? She'll get less than she wanted, but yes, she'll qualify. Her credit is still good, despite the high debt-to-income ratio. Good. Process it as usual. I had no intention of stopping Victoria from digging herself deeper. Every dollar she borrowed was another strand in the web I was weaving. The market crash came faster than I'd anticipated. In my previous life, it had been a brief but sharp correction that mainly affected tech stocks and real estate in overheated markets. Having foreknowledge, I'd moved most of my liquid assets to safer investments months ago. Victoria had not been so prudent. Her panicked call came on a Tuesday morning. Olivia. Her voice was tight with barely controlled hysteria. I need to see you immediately. It's an emergency. I met her at an upscale cafe where she was already on her second mimosa. There you are, she said, her usual poise cracking around the edges. It's a disaster. Absolute disaster. What happened? I asked, though I already knew. My investment portfolio. She gulped her drink. It's down nearly 40%. Craig says it might drop further before it stabilizes. Craig was her financial advisor, a flashy, commission-based broker who pushed high-risk investments. That's terrible, I said, injecting concern into my voice. But the market will recover eventually. It always does. I don't have eventually, Victoria hissed, leaning forward. I have loan payments due now. The kitchen, the master bath, the landscaping, it's all financed. And I was counting on investment income to cover the payments. In my first life, this was the moment I'd written her a massive check. No questions asked. This time, I hesitated. How much are you short? Victoria named a figure that made me wince. Not because of the amount, but because of what it revealed about her financial recklessness. That's significant, I said. I know. She ran a hand through her perfectly highlighted hair. But it's just temporary. Once the market recovers... How much total debt are you carrying, Aunt Victoria? She blinked, thrown by the direct question. I don't see how that's relevant. It's very relevant if you're asking me for money. Victoria's eyes narrowed. I've never questioned how you spend the money I give you. The money you give me? I repeated incredulously. Your support payments, she clarified. I've never demanded an accounting. The audacity was breathtaking. Those aren't gifts, Victoria. They're payments for your services as my guardian, services that ended legally when I turned 18. Her face flushed. After everything I've done for you, this is how you speak to me. I gave up my life to raise you. And I've been paying you handsomely for it for years, I replied evenly. But I need to understand what I'm getting into before I loan you more money. Victoria's expression shifted, anger giving way to calculation. Of course, darling, I'm just upset. The total is... She named a sum that I knew was at least 30% less than her actual debt. I see, I said. And what collateral can you offer? Collateral? She looked genuinely confused. Olivia, we're family. I don't need to offer collateral. Actually, you do. I've been generous, but this is business. Victoria's face hardened. I see, and what would you suggest? Your house, I said simply. It's your primary asset. You want me to put up my house against a loan from my own niece? Her voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. That's absurd. It's standard financial practice, I corrected. And if you're confident you can repay the loan, there's no risk. Victoria stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You've changed, she said finally. You used to have such a kind heart. I almost laughed at the manipulation. My heart is just fine, but my business sense has improved considerably. In the end, Victoria agreed to my terms, a formal loan agreement with her house as collateral, a reasonable interest rate, and a 2-year repayment period. Mr. Winters drew up the paperwork, ensuring everything was legally binding. Are you sure about this? He asked when Victoria had left his office after signing. The terms are generous, but given the amount and her financial situation. You think she'll default? I finished for him. He adjusted his glasses uncomfortably. I think the probability is higher than one would like for a family loan. I understand the risk, I assured him, and I'm prepared for all possible outcomes. What I didn't tell him was that I was counting on Victoria to default. Every financial decision she'd made in the past 5 years had been building toward this moment. Taking on debt she couldn't repay, investing money she didn't have, living far beyond her means. The trap was set. All that remained was for Victoria to spring it herself. She did what? Emma stared at me across the table at our weekly lunch. Tried to forge my signature on a withdrawal form, I repeated, keeping my voice low. Mr. Winters caught it immediately. Holy shit, Emma whispered. That's criminal. Are you pressing charges? No, I said. That would be too merciful. Emma's eyebrows shot up. Merciful? Liv, she tried to steal from you. That's a felony. I sipped my water, considering how to explain. Victoria has been stealing from me for years, just not so blatantly. If I press charges now, it ends too quickly. The fallout would be immediate, but limited. And you want, what, a slow burn? I want her to experience the full consequences of her actions, I said carefully, and those consequences are still unfolding. Emma studied me with concern. This isn't like you, Liv, the revenge thing. It's not revenge, I insisted. It's justice. But was it? The question had been nagging at me lately, especially as I grew closer to Michael. He knew pieces of my history with Victoria, but not the full story. Not the calculated plan I'd been executing for years. Just be careful, Emma said finally. Revenge has a way of changing people, and not usually for the better. I brushed aside her concern, but her words stayed with me as I drove to Victoria's house that evening. I'd requested this meeting, planning to confront her about the forgery attempt. Victoria greeted me with brittle cheerfulness, as if she hadn't recently tried to commit fraud. Olivia, darling, what a lovely surprise. I was just about to open a bottle of wine. Care to join me? The house was immaculate as always, but I noticed small changes since my last visit. The fresh flowers were missing from the entryway table. The art piece in the living room had been replaced with a cheaper print. Signs of financial strain seeping through the carefully maintained facade. I'm not staying long, I said. I came to discuss something with you. Victoria's smile faltered. Oh, sounds serious. It is. I set my purse on the counter and fixed her with a steady gaze. Mr. Winters called me. He caught you trying to forge my signature. For a moment, Victoria froze. Then, remarkably, she laughed. Oh, that. A simple misunderstanding. I was helping organize your paperwork, and I was practicing your signature to show you how easily it could be forged. A security demonstration. The lie was so outrageous, I almost admired her commitment to it. The form was for a transfer of $500,000 from my trust to your personal account. Victoria's smile tightened. As I said, a demonstration. I would never actually submit such a form. You did submit it. Mr. Winters has it. Her expression flickered between several emotions before settling on righteous indignation. Well, I'm deeply hurt that you would accuse me of something so terrible. After everything I've done for you. Stop, I interrupted. Just stop, Victoria. The act isn't working anymore. She drew herself up, affronted. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but your attitude is completely unacceptable. My attitude? I repeated incredulously. You committed fraud and you're concerned about my attitude? I did no such thing, she insisted. And I won't stand here and be accused in my own home. Fine, I said, pulling a document from my purse. Then I'll make this quick. This is a formal agreement acknowledging that you attempted to defraud me, that I'm choosing not to press charges, and that in return you will adhere to strict terms regarding our financial relationship going forward. Victoria glanced at the paper, then back at me. You can't be serious. Sign it or I call the police right now. You wouldn't dare, she challenged. The scandal would affect you as much as me. I pulled out my phone. Try me. For 30 seconds, we engaged in a silent standoff. Then, something in my expression must have convinced her I wasn't bluffing. Let me read it first, she said, snatching the document. Her eyes widened as she scanned the terms, specific restrictions on her access to me, my home, and my finances. A requirement that all future financial interactions be documented and witnessed. A clause that any breach would result in immediate legal action. This is ridiculous, she spluttered. You're treating me like a criminal. If the shoe fits, I replied coldly. Victoria looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not the manufactured worry she displayed when manipulating me, but genuine fear that her control was slipping. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice smaller. Because it's long overdue, I said simply. After more protests and attempts at emotional manipulation, Victoria finally signed the agreement. I had a notary waiting in a car outside, a detail that further infuriated Victoria but ensured the document was legally binding. As I was leaving, she called after me. "This isn't over, Olivia." I turned back. "You're right, it's just beginning." The next phase of Victoria's downfall came from an unexpected quarter. Rachel had taken the investment I'd provided and launched her creative agency with impressive efficiency. Within 6 months, she'd secured several clients and was already breaking even, ahead of her business plan's projections. I'd kept my involvement secret as promised, but Victoria had grown increasingly suspicious of Rachel's sudden entrepreneurial success. The confrontation happened at one of our increasingly strained family dinners. "So, Rachel," Victoria began with deceptive casualness, "that new office space of yours must be expensive. Prime downtown location, all that exposed brick and industrial chic." Rachel tensed beside me. "It's a good investment. Location matters in my business." "Indeed," Victoria nodded. "And the startup capital came from where, exactly? Last I checked, your credit cards were maxed out from that disastrous trip to Bali." "I got investors," Rachel said, avoiding my eyes. "Investors," Victoria repeated skeptically. "For a business with no track record, run by someone with no formal experience?" "My agency already has 6 clients," Rachel defended, "and I have 3 years of industry experience." "Posting pictures of yourself with products is hardly industry experience," Victoria scoffed. "Be honest, where did the money come from?" Rachel's fork clattered against her plate. "Why do you care? You said it was a stupid idea that would never work." "I'm your mother. I have a right to know if you're getting yourself into trouble." "Trouble?" Rachel laughed bitterly. "You mean like remortgaging your house 3 times to fund renovations you can't afford? That kind of trouble." Victoria's face paled. "That's completely different." "Is it?" Rachel challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've been living off Olivia's money for years while pretending to run a successful design business that has exactly 0 clients." The room fell silent. Victoria's eyes darted between Rachel and me, shock giving way to calculation. "Olivia," she said slowly, "did you give Rachel money for this business venture?" Before I could respond, Rachel interjected, "She invested. Unlike you, she actually believed in me." Victoria's expression hardened. "I see. So this is how it's going to be, the two of you conspiring behind my back?" "Oh my God!" Rachel threw down her napkin. "Not everything is about you, Mom. I have an actual business, with actual clients who pay actual money for actual services. A business funded by your cousin who you never even liked." Victoria's voice rose. "Don't think I don't see what's happening here. She's turning you against me." "Turning me against you," Rachel repeated incredulously. "You've been doing that all by yourself for years." Victoria turned to me, eyes glittering with anger. "Clever move, Olivia, very clever. But remember who raised you? Remember who was there when your parents abandoned you?" The words hit like a physical blow. "Abandoned me? They died in an accident." "Is that what you think?" Victoria laughed, a harsh sound. "They were running away. Your father's company was failing, creditors were circling, and they decided to escape to the cabin for a weekend getaway. In a rainstorm on dangerous mountain roads with a child left behind." "That's not true," I whispered, though there was no way to know for certain. "Of course it is. Why do you think they left you with me instead of taking you along? They were planning something desperate. The crash just happened before they could execute whatever scheme Robert had concocted." Rachel looked horrified. "Mom, stop it." "No, she needs to hear this," Victoria continued relentlessly. "Your perfect parents were frauds, Olivia. Your father's business wasn't successful. It was on the verge of bankruptcy. The only reason you ended up with anything was because of the life insurance policies that paid out. Policies that were suspiciously large for a failing business owner." I stood up, my hands shaking. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask Jefferson Winters, who really sorted out the financial mess your father left behind. Ask him about the creditors who had to be paid off quietly to avoid a scandal. Ask him who protected your precious inheritance from being seized." "That's enough," Rachel said firmly, standing up as well. "You've said enough." Victoria looked between us, a cruel smile playing at her lips. "Family first, isn't that right, Olivia? But which family? The parents who left you behind? Or the aunt who sacrificed everything to raise you? I think we're done here. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Rachel, are you coming? Rachel nodded, grabbing her purse. As we headed for the door, Victoria called after us. You'll regret this, both of you. When everything falls apart, don't come crying to me. In the car, Rachel was silent for several minutes before finally speaking. I'm sorry about what she said. Is it true? I asked, my voice small. About my parents? Rachel sighed. I don't know, Mom has always had her own version of reality, but what? I found some old papers once when I was looking for my birth certificate. Letters from creditors addressed to your dad. They seemed pretty serious. This was new information, details I hadn't known in either lifetime. But it didn't change my plan. If anything, it made Victoria's betrayal worse. She'd used my parents' memory as a weapon while knowing the true complexity of their situation. It doesn't matter, I said finally. Whatever financial troubles they had, they didn't deserve to die. And Victoria didn't deserve to exploit their death for her own gain. Rachel nodded. For what it's worth, I don't think she was always this way. Something changed after they died. What do you mean? She was different before, more genuine. The obsession with money and status came later. Rachel stared out the window. Sometimes I wonder if she was jealous, that your parents' death somehow gave you a future while taking away hers. The thought had never occurred to me in either lifetime. Victoria jealous of me? Of the traumatized 8-year-old who lost everything in a single night? But perhaps Rachel was right. Perhaps Victoria's resentment had festered over years, transforming from duty to entitlement to outright theft. Not that it excused anything she'd done. I dropped Rachel at her apartment, then called Michael, needing his steady presence after Victoria's emotional assault. He listened as I recounted the evening's events, not interrupting until I'd finished. Do you want me to look into it? He asked gently. I know people who could verify the financial claims, discreetly. No, I said after a moment. It doesn't change anything. The past is the past. But it's bothering you, he observed, only because I thought I knew everything. It turns out there are still surprises, even the second time around. The second time? I froze, realizing my slip. I just meant it feels like I've been through Victoria's manipulations before, like a recurring nightmare. Michael was quiet for a moment. Liv, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. My heart rate accelerated. What is it? This plan of yours with Victoria. The properties you're buying around her house, the loan against it, the careful documentation of her financial misdeeds. Where does it end? It was a fair question, one I hadn't fully confronted myself. With her losing the house, I admitted, when she defaults on the loan, which she will. And then what? She'll be homeless? No, I said quickly. I wouldn't let that happen. But she'll have to downsize significantly. Live within actual means, not a fantasy funded by my inheritance. And that will make you happy? He asked, no judgment in his tone, just genuine curiosity. I thought it would, I answered honestly. Now I'm not so sure. 3 months later, as predicted, Victoria missed her first loan payment. The market had recovered somewhat, but her investments remained underwater, and her design business was still a fiction. She called me in a panic. It's just a temporary cash flow issue, she insisted. I'll have the money next month, I promise. I reminded her of the terms we'd agreed upon. Missed payments would trigger penalties and accelerate the repayment schedule. You can't be serious, she said. I'm your aunt, for God's sake. Business is business, I replied, echoing the phrase she'd used countless times when convincing me to fund her lifestyle. The terms are clear. After that, Victoria shifted strategies, alternating between tearful pleas and vicious attacks. She called my friends, telling them I was having a mental breakdown. She contacted Michael, suggesting I needed psychiatric help. She even showed up at my office, creating a scene that required security intervention. None of it worked. The second missed payment triggered formal default proceedings. A week before the house was scheduled for auction, Victoria made a final desperate attempt. She invited me to dinner, promising to explain everything if I would just stop the foreclosure process. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The Victoria who greeted me that evening was a shadow of her former self. The perfect hair was now streaked with gray, the designer outfit replaced by a simple blouse and pants that had seen better days. Her makeup couldn't hide the strain of the past months. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading me to the dining room. The elaborate spreads of previous dinners had been replaced by a simple pasta dish and salad. No wine, just water. "You said you wanted to explain," I prompted after several minutes of uncomfortable small talk. Victoria set down her fork. "I need you to understand why I did what I did, not to excuse it, but so you'll know I'm not the monster you think I am." "I'm listening." She took a deep breath. "When your parents died, I was barely making ends meet. The business your father and I had started together had failed. I was divorced, raising Rachel alone, working 2 jobs. This was news to me. You and my father had a business together? A small investment firm. Robert was the face, the charming one who brought in clients. I did the back office work, the numbers." Her expression turned bitter. "But when it started to fail, he cut me out. Claimed my risky strategies were to blame when it was his poor decisions that tanked us." I tried to reconcile this with the father I remembered. Kind, generous, always patient with my endless questions. "The night of the accident," Victoria continued, "they were coming to see me. Robert had called, said he had a solution that would fix everything. I thought maybe he'd secured new investors or found a buyer for the company assets." Her voice caught. "Instead, they died on that mountain road, and suddenly I was responsible for you, a grieving child with a trust fund I couldn't access except for your direct expenses. Do you have any idea what that was like? Raising my dead brother's daughter while barely able to provide for my own?" "So you started seeing me as a meal ticket," I said flatly. "No." Victoria looked genuinely hurt. "Not at first. At first, I loved you like my own. But as the years passed, watching your trust grow while I struggled, resentment crept in. I started to feel entitled to some of it. After all, wasn't I the one doing the hard work of raising you? Didn't I deserve compensation beyond the basic stipend the trust provided?" It was the most honest she'd ever been with me, but honesty didn't erase the years of manipulation and theft. "Why the forgery?" I asked. "Why risk criminal charges?" Victoria's shoulders slumped. Desperation, the loans, the renovations, it all spiraled out of control. I kept thinking the next investment would fix everything, or the business would finally take off. By the time I realized how deep the hole was, it was too late. And now I'm about to lose my home," she said simply, "unless you help me." In my first life, this appeal would have worked instantly. The guilt, the family obligation, the skillful emotional manipulation. It was Victoria's most effective toolkit. "I can't stop the foreclosure," I said finally. "The legal process is too far along." Hope died in her eyes. "I see. But," I continued, "I can make sure you have somewhere to live. A small apartment, reasonable rent, and a job if you want one." "A job?" Victoria looked as if I'd suggested she become a circus performer. "Doing what?" "Administrative work at Rachel's agency if she's willing, or at one of my companies." "Charity," Victoria said bitterly, "from my own niece." "No, Aunt Victoria, it's called consequences." The auction was held on a bright spring morning. Victoria had refused to attend, locking herself in the house until the very last moment, when the bank representative arrived with sheriff's deputies to ensure the property was vacated. I'd arranged for a storage unit for her belongings and a short-term rental while she found suitable permanent housing. Rachel had reluctantly agreed to let Victoria work at her agency part-time, handling client billing and basic office management. None of this had been received with gratitude. I arrived at the auction venue, a conference room at a downtown hotel, and took a seat in the back. Through my holding company, I'd already placed a proxy bidder with instructions to acquire the property regardless of competing offers. The proceedings began with clinical efficiency. The auctioneer described the property, read the legal notices, and opened the floor for bids. Several people showed interest initially, but as the price climbed, they dropped out one by one. In the end, only my representative and one other bidder remained. The final price was well above market value. The other bidder had been unusually persistent. As the paperwork was being processed, I approached the runner-up, curious about their interest in the property. "Excuse me," I began. "You seemed very determined to purchase that house." The woman turned, and I was startled to see Diana Parker, Emma's mother. Olivia, she said, looking equally surprised. I didn't realize you were here. I wasn't bidding, I clarified quickly. Just observing. Diana's expression was skeptical. Really? Because the winning bidder was representing Highland Capital, which is one of your holding companies. I should have known she'd make the connection. You're well informed. I arranged the purchase of 6 properties surrounding this one for you, she reminded me. It wasn't hard to see the pattern. She paused. What I don't understand is why you're going through all this. If you wanted your aunt's house, why not just buy it from her directly? It's complicated, I said, unwilling to reveal the full extent of my plan. It usually is with family. Diana sighed. For what it's worth, I was bidding on behalf of a developer client. They're interested in the entire block for a mixed-use project. This was an unexpected complication. What kind of project? High-end condos, retail on the ground floor. They've already approached several homeowners in the area, including, I realized, the holding companies I controlled. The developer would eventually trace those back to me as well. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'll keep that in mind. As I left the auction, I spotted a familiar figure leaning against my car, Victoria, her expression thunderous. So it was you, she said as I approached. I should have known. How did you find out? I asked, seeing no point in denying it. Rachel let it slip that you'd been buying properties in the neighborhood. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Victoria laughed bitterly. All this time, I thought you were just being financially prudent. Turns out you were plotting my downfall step by step. Not your downfall, I corrected, just an end to your exploitation. By taking my home? She demanded. The home where I raised you? The home my parents paid for, I countered. The home you remortgaged to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford. The home you put up as collateral against a loan you had no intention of repaying. Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping. You think you've won, don't you? Clever Olivia with her investments and her long game, but you can't rewrite history. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know things about your parents that would break your heart. Things I've protected you from all these years? I'd heard enough. You've used my parents as emotional leverage since I was 8 years old. It stops now. Does it? Victoria's smile was cruel. How will you feel when you realize the inheritance you're so preciously guarding came from insurance fraud? When you learn your father was under investigation when he died? You're lying, I said, but uncertainty crept in. Am I? Ask Jefferson Winters about the sealed documents in your father's file. The ones I made him promise never to show you. She stepped back. You've taken my home, Olivia, but at least I can take your illusions. As Victoria walked away, I felt the triumph I'd expected begin to curdle into doubt. What if she was telling the truth? What if my entire narrative of virtuous parents and a predatory aunt was built on a foundation of half-truths? I called Mr. Winters immediately, demanding to see the sealed documents Victoria had mentioned. I can't discuss this over the phone, he said, uncharacteristically terse. Come to my office tomorrow at 9. That night was one of the longest of my second life. I paced my apartment, torn between wanting to know the truth and fearing what it might be. Michael called twice, concerned when I didn't answer the first time. Whatever it is, he said when I finally picked up, we'll face it together. His use of we should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded me of everything I'd kept from him. The rebirth, the calculated revenge, the person I'd been in my first life and was perhaps becoming again in this one. I need to do this alone, I said. The sealed envelope Mr. Winters handed me the next morning was thin, containing just a few pages. These were to be given to you when you turned 30, he explained, or earlier at Victoria's discretion, if she deemed it necessary for your financial protection. My financial protection? Mr. Winters nodded gravely. Your father was concerned that certain irregularities in his business dealings might eventually come to light. These documents were his attempt to shield you and the trust from any potential consequences. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from my father, dated 1 week before his death, and several legal documents. The letter began simply, My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. What followed was a confession. My father's investment firm had been falsifying returns for years, using new investor money to pay dividends to existing clients. A classic Ponzi scheme. When the recession hit and investors began demanding their money back, the fraud was exposed. I never meant for it to happen, he wrote. What began as a temporary measure during a market downturn became a years-long deception. Your mother knew nothing of this. The guilt is mine alone. The legal documents were his attempt to isolate the trust fund he'd established for me from his business assets, protecting my inheritance from the inevitable lawsuits and restitution orders. Victoria knows everything, the letter continued. She has agreed to guard this secret and protect you from the fallout. Trust her, Olivia. Despite our differences, she loves you and will keep you safe. The room seemed to tilt as I looked up at Mr. Winters. Did the authorities ever investigate? After the accident? There was a preliminary inquiry, he confirmed. But with both principals deceased and most records destroyed in a convenient office fire, it was eventually closed. The insurance policies paid out, the trust was secured, and Victoria became your guardian. She knew, I whispered. All this time, she knew my father was a fraud. And protected you from that knowledge, Mr. Winters said gently. Whatever her faults, she honored that promise. I left his office in a daze, the letter clutched in my hand. Everything I thought I knew about my parents, about Victoria, about the past 20 years of my life, both lives, had been upended. Victoria hadn't been lying. My father had been running from creditors and possibly criminal charges. The inheritance I'd been so determined to protect from Victoria's machinations had its origins in my father's fraud, and Victoria, despite everything, had kept his secret, had raised me believing my parents were good people who had died tragically, had shouldered the burden of knowledge alone. It didn't excuse her financial exploitation, but it did complicate the neat narrative of villain and victim I'd constructed. I found myself driving to Victoria's new apartment, a modest two-bedroom in a building I owned through one of my companies. She answered the door in a bathrobe, her face bare of makeup, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "Come to gloat?" she asked, but the usual venom was missing from her voice. I held up the letter. "I came to talk about this." Her eyes widened slightly. "Jefferson gave you the documents. You knew." It wasn't a question. "About Dad's fraud, about all of it." Victoria sighed heavily, then stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was sparse, with just a few pieces of furniture salvaged from the house. Boxes lined the walls, most still sealed. "Of course I knew," she said, sinking onto the sofa. "I helped him set up the original investment structure, not the fraud part," she added quickly. "That came later, after we'd parted ways professionally." "But you knew before they died." She nodded. "Robert came to me that week, desperate. The whole thing was unraveling. Investors were demanding their money back. The SEC was asking questions. He needed a way out." "And the accident?" Victoria's gaze snapped to mine. "Don't go there, Olivia. It was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident." "But convenient," I pressed. "The insurance policies paid out. The investigation stalled without its primary target. The trust was protected." "Think what you want," she said flatly. "I wasn't in that car, neither were you." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of decades-old secrets pressing down between us. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally asked. "All these years you let me believe." "That your parents were good people who loved you?" Victoria interrupted. "Yes, I did. Because despite everything, they did love you. Robert's financial crimes don't change that." "But you used it against me," I said. "You held their memory over my head to manipulate me into giving you money." "I protected you from the truth," she countered. "I raised you believing you came from good people, not a fraudster who destroyed lives, while helping yourself to my inheritance." Victoria didn't deny it. "I told myself I deserved it, for keeping the secret, for raising you, for putting my life on hold." "Did you ever care about me at all?" I asked, the question that had haunted both my lifetimes. "Or was I just a meal ticket with a convenient trust fund?" "Of course I cared about you," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "You were all I had left of my brother. But caring and resenting aren't mutually exclusive, Olivia. I did both." It was, perhaps, the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. I can't give you back the house, I said finally. I know, but I can help you build a new life. A real one, not based on lies and manipulation. Victoria laughed bitterly. At my age, starting over from nothing? Not nothing, I corrected. You have experience, connections. You just need to use them honestly for once. She studied me for a long moment. Why would you help me now after everything? Because I'm tired of this cycle, I admitted. The resentment, the manipulation, the revenge. It's exhausting, Victoria. I want it to end. And you think we can just start over? She asked skeptically. Not start over. Move forward. I stood up. Think about it. The job offer with Rachel is still open if you want it. As I reached the door, Victoria called after me, Olivia? I turned back. How could you possibly have known? She asked, genuine puzzlement in her voice. About my financial situation, the loans, everything. It's like you could see the future. If she only knew how right she was. I learned from the best, I said simply, and closed the door behind me. The revelation about my father changed everything and nothing. The facts of Victoria's exploitation remained the same, but the context had shifted. She wasn't simply a predator who had targeted a vulnerable heiress. She was a complicated woman who had made both sacrifices and selfish choices. I kept the house she had lost, but not for myself. Instead, I donated it to a local nonprofit that provided transitional housing for families in crisis. The organization renovated it to accommodate 3 separate family units, each with their own entrance and living space. Victoria eventually accepted the job with Rachel, bringing organizational skills that proved surprisingly valuable to the growing agency. Their relationship remained strained, but functional. And over time, as Victoria built a modest but legitimate income of her own, some of her more materialistic tendencies began to fade. 6 months after the auction, I invited Michael to dinner at my apartment. We'd been seeing each other regularly, but something had shifted between us. A hesitancy on my part that he couldn't understand and I couldn't explain. I need to tell you something, I said after we'd finished eating. Something that will sound impossible. Michael set down his wine glass. I'm listening. I took a deep breath. I've lived this life before. I died when I was 26, and then I was given a second chance. I came back to when I was 18 with all my memories intact. He stared at me, expression unreadable. You're serious? Completely. I reached for his hand. In my first life, Victoria manipulated me until the very end. I died without ever seeing through her lies, without ever standing up for myself. When I got this second chance, all I could think about was making her pay. And that's why you've been so methodical about the properties, the loan, everything. I nodded. I knew exactly what would happen because I'd already lived through a version of it. I just changed the ending. Why tell me now? He asked. Because in my first life, I never met you. And now that I have, I don't want any more secrets between us. I squeezed his hand. You've made this second life worth living, for more than just revenge. Michael was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, I don't know if I can believe in rebirth or cosmic second chances, but I do believe you've been carrying a burden I couldn't see until now. You're not running for the door, I observed. That's a good sign. He smiled slightly. I'm still processing. But Liv, even if I accepted every word as literal truth, it wouldn't change how I feel about you. And how is that? I asked, hardly daring to breathe. Like you're the most fascinating, complex, occasionally terrifying woman I've ever met. He leaned forward. And I'm completely in love with you. Words I'd never heard in my first life. Words that made this second chance truly worth it. I love you too, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. 2 weeks later, as we were having lunch with Emma and Rachel at a new restaurant downtown, I felt a strange flutter in my chest. A brief palpitation, there, and gone in an instant. The exact symptom that had first sent me to the doctor in my previous life. I froze, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, as cold dread washed over me. Was it happening again? Was the heart condition that had killed me once preparing to strike again? Liv? Michael touched my arm. You okay? I forced a smile. Fine, just remembered something I forgot to do at work. But for the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the fear. That night, alone in my apartment, I researched the condition that had taken my life before, a rare congenital heart defect that often went undiagnosed until symptoms became severe. The next morning, I called a cardiologist and scheduled a comprehensive workup, inventing a family history to justify the extensive testing. A week later, I sat across from Dr. Patel as she reviewed my results. "Everything looks normal," she said, flipping through the charts. "Your heart structure and function are excellent. No evidence of any abnormalities." "That's impossible," I blurted out. I mean, are you sure? Could you have missed something?" Dr. Patel looked at me curiously. "The tests were quite thorough, Miss Chen. Is there a specific concern you haven't mentioned? How could I explain that in another lifetime this same heart had failed catastrophically? That I knew with absolute certainty it was defective?" "Just family history," I said weakly. "Well, prevention is always wise," she said. "But based on these results, I'd say you're in excellent cardiovascular health." I left her office in a daze. Had my rebirth somehow corrected the physical flaw that killed me? Or had the cosmic balance that mysterious voice mentioned extended to my very cells? Whatever the explanation, it seemed I had been given more than just a chance to right past wrongs. I had been given a full life to live. With this realization came a profound shift in perspective. The revenge that had consumed me for years suddenly seemed less important than the future stretching before me. A future I'd never expected to have. That evening, I visited my parents' graves for the first time since my rebirth. In my first life, I'd come here monthly, seeking connection with the idealized versions of them Victoria had constructed for me. After learning the truth, I'd stayed away, uncertain how to reconcile my memories with reality. The cemetery was peaceful in the early evening light. I placed flowers on their shared headstone, then sat on the small bench nearby. "I know the truth now," I said softly, "about the business, the fraud, everything." The only response was the gentle rustling of leaves. "I don't know what to do with it," I continued. "I can't condone what you did, Dad. People lost everything because of your choices. But I also can't hate you for it. You're still the father who taught me to ride a bike and checked for monsters under my bed." Tears welled up unexpectedly. "And Mom, I want to believe you didn't know, that you were as much a victim as anyone. I hope that's true." In the end, I realized, it didn't matter. The past couldn't be changed, not even by someone who had been given a second chance at life. What mattered was how I chose to live now, with the knowledge I had and the time I'd been given. 6 months later, I founded the Chen Family Foundation, dedicated to financial education and assistance for victims of investment fraud. The irony wasn't lost on me, using proceeds from my father's questionable legacy to help those harmed by similar schemes. Rachel's agency became one of our primary partners, creating campaigns to raise awareness about financial literacy and warning signs of fraud. Victoria, to my surprise, threw herself into the work with unexpected passion. "I spent decades pretending to be something I wasn't," she explained when I questioned her enthusiasm. "It's exhausting. Being useful, actually useful, feels better." We were never going to have the warm, loving relationship I'd craved as a child. Too much had happened between us. But we found a new equilibrium, not based on exploitation or revenge, but on a shared commitment to something larger than ourselves. Michael proposed on my 27th birthday, one day past the age I'd reached in my previous life. The symmetry felt right somehow, a marker of truly moving beyond my first existence. "You know," he said as we celebrated that night, "I've been thinking about your rebirth story." I tensed slightly. We rarely discussed it. Michael had accepted my truth without necessarily believing it literally. "What about it?" "If it is true," he said carefully, "I think the point wasn't revenge against Victoria." "No?" He shook his head. "The universe doesn't give second chances just so you can settle scores. I think you were sent back to heal. Not just the financial wrongs, but the deeper wounds. To find truth instead of comfortable illusions." I considered this. That's a much more profound purpose than the one I assigned myself. "You've always been profound," he smiled, "even when you were plotting financial revenge." We married in a small ceremony the following spring. Emma was my maid of honor, Rachel a bridesmaid. Victoria attended, not as mother of the bride, that role could never be hers, but as a family member who had earned her place through hard-won honesty. As we exchanged vows, I found myself thinking of that moment in the darkness after my first death, the mysterious voice offering balance, the chance to rewrite what had been written incorrectly. I had thought it meant punishing Victoria, setting the financial ledger straight, but perhaps the real balance lay in finding a way forward that acknowledged both the harm done and the potential for change, in creating something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. 1 year later, I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl we named Robert and Laura after my parents. Not to pretend their flaws hadn't existed, but to honor the good in them while acknowledging the complexity of their legacy. Victoria, now in her 60s and settled into a life far more authentic than her previous existence, became an unexpectedly devoted grandmother, the masks she'd worn for decades. Both the perfectly coiffed socialite and the bitter manipulator had fallen away, revealing a woman capable of genuine connection when not driven by resentment and greed. "They're beautiful," she said, holding Robert while I nursed Laura. "You know, your father would be proud of you. Not because you're rich or successful, but because you've built something real." "Even the foundation?" I asked, "given what it represents?" Victoria smiled wryly. "Especially that. Robert was many things, but in his better moments, he understood accountability. He just wasn't brave enough to face it himself." As she carefully returned my son to my arms, I realized we had both been given second chances. Mine had come through supernatural intervention, hers through natural consequences and the opportunity to rebuild. "Thank you," I said suddenly. Victoria looked startled. "For what?" "For raising me," I said simply. "It wasn't always good and it wasn't always right. But you did it when you didn't have to." She blinked rapidly, emotion crossing her face. "I made so many mistakes." "Yes," I agreed, "and so did I." In the end, that was the true inheritance. Not the money, which was just a tool, but the understanding that our lives are shaped by both the wounds we receive and the healing we choose. By the harm we cause and the amends we make. By what we take and what we give back. The interest on that inheritance wasn't measured in dollars or properties. It was calculated in wisdom, in growth, in the courage to face truth, rather than comfortable illusions. And unlike Victoria's house, it could never be foreclosed.